Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Product Tank for 2022. On behalf of the entire Product Tank Oslo team, we thank all of you for joining this event. Now, I think there are people joining from across the globe, some from Norway, also some from outside of Norway. So, welcome to all of you. Now, before we start, some administrative stuff. Uh, since you're doing this on YouTube, if you have any questions at any time, feel free to drop your comments at the bottom in the YouTube comment section, and those will pop up, and we'll be able to see them. If you have any questions for our speakers, the moment they come to your mind, just drop them in. Once each speaker finishes her talk, after that we will pick up the questions. And if there is anything you want to share, the comment section is there. Just feel free to drop a line. With that, let's begin this fantastic evening. So for those who are new to this meetup, Product Tank is an informal meetup with chapters across the globe that brings together local product communities within each of these cities to share their own experience in product. This movement started back in 2010, so it's been more than a decade that it's on. Product Tanks are present in more than 200 cities across the globe. And the last time we counted was more than 150,000 members across. Product Tank Oslo itself has been around since 2015. Now, Product Tank is a part of the parent organization MTP, or Mind the Product, which is a global professional network for product people. Now, as a lone ranger in the product team in the organization, it's quite natural to feel lost, don't know where to look at. Now, Mind the Product closes that gap for you. You get access to a lot of resources to further your craft. There are blog posts, there is the Product Experience podcast, there is a Slack community of MTP connecting product managers, product practitioners across the globe, and even individual chapters. Now, MTP also hosts conferences across the globe. There are some flagship conferences, San Francisco in May, MTP Engage in Hamburg. Now, the pre-pandemic, these were organized very frequently. Post the pandemic, they're adapting, and there are hybrid events also happening. These tickets get sold out pretty quickly. You can also leverage MTP resources, MTP to conduct trainings and workshops within your own organization to raise the bar of your product teams. Now, do you feel like joining in? Speak at a local product tank. You can tweak that keynote you want to present in a global conference by practicing it in a product tank. Your company can choose to also host or sponsor a product tank when we get back to more regular in-person events. And you know what? Hang around till the end of the event today, and there's a special announcement for exactly that, an in-person event. Now, if you think that the microphone isn't your friend, but the keyboard is, well then right away, you could also write blogs on MTP. Join the MTP membership to benefit from these and a lot more resources in there. So who can you get in touch with if you want to do something with the Product Tank Oslo? Well, until last year, there was a very different set of pictures on this slide before. Now, it's these people. So a big shout out to Christian, Leo, and Fred for joining the team as I stay on from the old team. And a special shout out to Honors, who's running this event at the back today. Without all of these people, it's very hard to bring these events to you. The event today is co-hosted by productleder.no. Now, some of you who are part of that product community also know that this is a local Norwegian community of product managers with a Slack community of over 500 members, 500 PMs from more than 100 companies in Norway. For those who engage pretty frequently here, definitely recognize Christian, Fred, and Leo in the community from the previous slide. So the theme today is product discovery. Now, building the right thing versus building the thing right, this is always a tussle. How do you know that you're making the product that your customers want? While trying to answer all of these questions, you might try your hands at discovery or experiments, but what do these really mean? Now, how can you build all of this into your routines? As a product manager, what can you do to hone your skills, and how can you build that discovery muscle? To explore this and more, we have an exciting lineup of speakers today. So, next to the speakers, today we'll start with Teresa Torres. She'll talk about the what and the why of continuous discovery. Following her, we'll have Susanna from Inspera, who will present a case study. And lastly, we'll have a team from Fabric presenting their experience and learnings in the product discovery world. With this, I'm now going to start with Teresa. Teresa, now is the time when you start sharing your screen, switching your camera on, and all of that. And let me introduce you first to the audience here. Now, for the audience, if you're passionate about product discovery, you've definitely come across her. I've read the book on continuous discovery habits last summer and was super inspired with it. Teresa is an internationally acclaimed author, speaker, and coach. She's coached hundreds of teams at companies of all sizes, from early stage startups to global enterprises in a variety of industries. She has taught over 7,000 product people discovery skills through her Product Talk Academy. And she is, like I said, the author of Continuous Discovery Habits. With this, I hand the stage over to Teresa. Looking forward to the talk next.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. So today I'm going to talk about the what and why of continuous discovery. We're going to start at the very beginning. I know from talking to the hosts that there's a lot of folks that have already gotten started in this realm. So we'll start at the beginning and we'll quickly dive into some more advanced topics. As Shubham mentioned in the intro, I have worked with hundreds of teams all over the world. This map is actually outdated. This represents the teams that I've coached. We recently did an analysis of where our students come from, and we worked with students in 54 countries, which is pretty spectacular. Part of the reason why I like to share this is I know it's really easy to learn about frameworks and tactics and to walk away thinking, I wish I worked at a company that did that, or that would never work at my company. And I want to challenge you and really think today about how you might bring some of these ideas to your own organization. Because as a coach and as definitely as an instructor through the Product Talk Academy, we've worked with students in a wide variety of contexts. And I think it's really important to think about how can we individually influence and individually affect the way that we work. And I think there's definitely ways to take elements of this and apply it in your organizational context, regardless of what it is. So I want to challenge you to look for those opportunities. And of course, in the Q&A, we can get into what makes this hard and how do we adapt that. So we're going to start at the very beginning. We often talk about discovery in contrast with delivery. And we use discovery to talk about the work that we're doing to decide what to build, and delivery is the work that we're doing to build, ship, and maintain a production quality product. Now, this distinction is important because a lot of companies have put a lot of emphasis on product delivery, and they forget to also emphasize product discovery. And so we're seeing that kind of balance out. The other thing we're seeing is that we're recognizing that if we want to do discovery well, we need to include the customer as part of that process. And then another major shift we're seeing is a shift from a project mindset to a continuous mindset. And that's really where we're going to spend most of our time today. So historically, companies have resource projects and an annual budgeting process. Teams are given outputs to build. Please complete this project by this timeline. And what we've seen over the last, say, 20 plus years is an evolution. Some places it's a very slow evolution. Other places it's been a much faster evolution towards a more continuous approach. This is easy to see on the delivery side, right? We see companies that used to release once a year, once a quarter, adopt their cadence to being able to deliver monthly or weekly. We see many companies releasing daily. It's a little bit harder to see what this looks like on the discovery side. And so that's really what I want to dive into today. And I'm going to start with a definition of continuous discovery. This does come from my book, Continuous Discovery Habits, where I define continuous discovery as, at a minimum, weekly touch points with customers by the team building the product, where they're conducting small research activities in pursuit of a desired product outcome. Now, there's a lot to this definition, so we're going to break it down line by line. I want to start with this first line of why is it so important to have this weekly cadence? This is really where we're unraveling this concept of continuous discovery. And this is really critical because as product people, we're making decisions every day. And first, I want to clarify, when I say product people, I mean anybody who's part of building a digital product. So product managers, designers, software engineers, user researchers, literally scrum masters, program managers, project managers, anybody who's involved in the building and support of a digital product. Now, some of these daily decisions are big strategic decisions, like which customers should we serve, what outcomes are we trying to drive. Others are more just everyday decisions, like how do we label this button, or how should the workflow of this feature work, or what does the underlying data model need to support. Most of us know that we should do some research when we're making those big strategic decisions, but we forget that we also could benefit from customer input on those other daily, more mundane decisions. And there's a really important reason for this. As product people, we work on our products all day, every day. And as a result, we become experts in our product. We know where everything lives in the interface. We know what order to do things to accomplish our goals. We know what our product's capable of and what it's not capable of. And the challenge with developing this expertise is that we start to suffer from a bias called the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge suggests that as you develop expertise in a topic, you forget what it was like to no longer have this expertise. You've probably experienced this before. When you meet somebody who works in a really niche field and they struggle to explain to you what they do, you're experiencing the curse of knowledge. They forget what it's like to not have all that expert knowledge, and they forget how to explain what they do. So as product people, we're developing expert knowledge about our product. The challenge is our customers don't share that expertise. They don't have the same depth of experience with our products as we do. And as we go about making these daily decisions, we start to make them from our expert point of view, and they stop working for our customers. If you need any evidence of this, I want you to pick up your mobile phones, because I'm guessing they're in arm's reach. And I just want you to scroll through your pages and pages of apps. And I'm going to guess that every single one of you has at least half a dozen, if not a dozen or more apps that you were excited about at one point that no longer works for you. Maybe it was always missing a critical feature. Maybe it didn't match your mental model. Maybe it just didn't engage you over time. Sadly, this is more common than not. And it's often because we go about making all these daily decisions and we get further and further away from what can work for our customers. Thankfully, there's a very simple way to fix this, and that's to simply engage with your customers more often. And I do recommend that you aspire to a weekly benchmark. Now, if you have never talked to a customer, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by this. I want you to look for your first customer to talk to. If you talk to customers occasionally or rarely, maybe try to get to monthly. Once you're at monthly, try to get to every other week. So you can take a continuous improvement mindset to this. The idea here is the more often we engage with customers, the more likely we're going to see that curse of knowledge at play. We're going to see the gap between how we think about the product and how our customers think about the product. And most of us, when we see that gap, we're going to be motivated to close that gap. So this continuous cadence is really all about how do we make sure that we're constantly exposing ourselves to how we think differently than our customers so that we're in a better position to make decisions that will work for them. So that's really this first line of weekly touch points with customers. We're engaging with them on a regular basis so that we become aware of that curse of knowledge and we can actively work to overcome it. Now, this second line, by the team building the product, is also really important. We see a lot of companies outsource research to maybe external design agencies, or maybe they have a centralized research team or a business intelligence team or a market research team. Those teams are great, and we should use the research that they're able to give to us. That's really great foundational research. But it's rare that teams outside of our own team can work on the cadence that we need. What I mean by that is product teams are making decisions every day. We need fast answers to support those decisions. Most of the rest of the company is working on a big project-based longer-term horizon, and our cadence of our work doesn't line up. So what we want is we want the team that's building the product to be in a position where they can get fast answers to their daily questions. And this starts with this idea of a product trio. So core to the idea of good discovery is this idea of cross-functional collaboration when making decisions about what to build. Now, at most companies, a product trio is typically comprised of a product manager, a designer, and a software engineer. And the idea is to get this team collaborating from the very beginning when making decisions about what to build. I want to contrast this with what we've historically done. Historically, a customer talks to a stakeholder talks to a product manager, the product manager writes requirements, they get handed off to the designer who does all the design work, and then both the requirements and the designs get handed off to the engineers to be built. What's wrong with this old model? We see two things. One, we see the customer message get distorted along the way, and we see a lot of rework. What do I mean by the customer message getting distorted? The customer communicates with the stakeholder. That's a high fidelity message. The stakeholder then communicates to the product manager, and inevitably a little bit of the context is lost. The product manager tries to codify it in a requirements document. A little bit more of that fidelity is lost. The designer interprets it as they do the design work. A little bit more of that fidelity is lost. And then we hand it off to the engineers, and a little bit more of the fidelity is lost. And it's no surprise that we end up building the wrong stuff. The team that's building the product has no direct interaction with the customer, and there's misinterpretations every step of the way. The other significant problem with this model is we see a lot of rework. We assume that if we work in our functional silos, it'll be more efficient. But we find in practice that's just not the case. The product manager writes requirements, they get handed off to the designer. The designer runs into challenges. Maybe something can't be designed appropriately and we have to go back and rewrite requirements. So the product manager and the designer go back and forth. They finally get to a point where they think something's ready to build. They hand it off to engineers, and the estimates come in at 4 times the amount of time that we have. So what do? We rewrite requirements. We redo design. We finally get within the scope, and engineers start building, and they run into technical constraints. So what do? We rewrite requirements. We redo design. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of waste. There's a third challenge with this way of working, which is when we don't include our engineers in the decisions about what to build, we don't get the best solutions. And that's because our engineers are closest to the technology. They know what's possible. Whereas our product manager and our designer and definitely our business stakeholder or our customer don't share that same expertise. They don't have that same depth of knowledge of what's possible. So to fix these challenges, what we're seeing is that companies are moving to a cross-functional approach to making good decisions about what to build. And like I said, at most companies, this looks like a product manager, a designer, and a software engineer working together. Now, most of us have more than just these 3 roles on our team. We probably have additional engineers, depending on how we interface with the rest of the business. We might have data analysts, product marketing managers, user researchers, customer success folks. If you don't see your title here, I'm not trying to leave you out. There could have been 100 titles on this slide. Nor am I saying with the trio, we're excluding everybody else from discovery. Here's the key idea of a product trio. We're trying to balance speed of decision-making with quality of decision-making. So what I mean by speed, the more people involved in a decision, the slower you're going to go. However, we want to balance that with the more relevant roles, keyword being relevant, involved in any decision, the better decision we're going to make. So don't think about this idea of a trio as a hard and fast, rigid concept. It flexes based on the roles available to you at your company and the types of decisions that you're making. So I've worked with trios. I'm going to put that in quotes because sometimes a trio is 4 people or 5 people. I've worked with trios where a data analyst was part of the decision-making team. I've worked with trios where a product manager and a product owner were part of the decision-making team. I've worked with trios where they had the luxury of a user researcher embedded in their team. And then I've also worked at companies where subject matter experts are part of the trio. I worked with a newspaper where a journalist was embedded with the team. I worked with a healthcare company where a clinician was embedded with the team. So this idea is really flexible. The main principle is how do we take a cross-functional approach to making good decisions about what we're going to build while also understanding the trade-offs of the size of the decision-making team and the quality of the decisions that we're going to get. So that's these first two lines. There's this core idea of we want the product trio leading discovery. Because they're leading discovery, they're engaging with customers on a weekly basis, trying to overcome that curse of knowledge. Now, as we get into the second half of this definition, I really want to highlight what are we doing when we engage with customers on a weekly basis? What are the activities that we're doing when we do that? Okay, so it's really key that we change our research activities. We're not going to take our old project-based methods and try to jam them into a weekly cadence. That's going to drive us nuts. So we're going to first change our research activities to be more continuous, and we want to make sure that they're in service of driving an outcome. So we don't want to do research for research's sake. As product teams, we create value, and we create value for the customer in a way that creates value for the business. And so I'm going to introduce a visual to help make sure that, one, we're doing the right research activities and they're staying focused on driving our outcome. And it's called an opportunity solution tree. I designed this visual to help teams chart the best path to their desired outcome. It also helps give structure to this messy world of discovery. It starts by defining a clear outcome. Now, I want to talk about outcomes for a minute because we're seeing across the industry a shift from an output mindset to an outcome mindset. And this is a really important shift. Historically, we've asked product teams to deliver a fixed set of outcomes. A fixed set of outputs. If you work against a 12-month roadmap, this is an example of an output focus. Our companies are saying, please build these features by this timeline. And I know many of you are probably still working this way because I think most teams still are. But we're seeing a shift. We're seeing companies recognize the future is uncertain, it's hard to predict, there's a lot of ambiguity. We want to be more reactive, or we want to be more agile. So instead of prescribing outputs, we're going to take a step back and say, what impact do we need those outputs to have? And then we're going to look at what outcomes can measure that impact. The whole world got a huge dose of why this shift is so important. If you started January 2020 with a fixed roadmap, I'm guessing by March of 2020, you had to make some pretty significant changes as the whole world reacted to a global pandemic. Now, we're not going to face a global pandemic most years of our lives, hopefully, but we do see constant change in the markets. We see new technology disrupt what's possible. We see new competitors enter our space. Even our own code releases changes customers' behavior. So this shift from an output mindset to an outcome mindset is really looking at how do we shift from focusing on the things we're building to focusing on the impact those things are having. Now, in this talk, I'm going to rely on Netflix in some of my examples. I've never worked with Netflix. They don't sponsor me. I use Netflix because I often speak with global audiences, and people around the world are familiar with how Netflix works. So if we think about a team at Netflix, what are some of the outcomes they might be focused on? To uncover appropriate outcomes, we tend to start with our business model. So Netflix is a subscription business. They're going to care about things like customer acquisition, customer retention, average monthly spend of customers. These are outcomes that allow us to focus on how do we create value for the business while still having flexibility on what we might build. This is a really critical idea. Now, once we have that outcome in place, which represents business value, we do want to look at how do we create customer value. And we're going to do that by discovering opportunities. Opportunities represent unmet customer needs, unmet customer pain points, and unmet customer desires. So we're looking at what are the opportunities that if we addressed them would create value for the customer in a way that would create value for the business. Now, the reason why we're starting with an outcome that represents business value and then secondarily looking at customer value is because the opportunity space is infinite. We could spend the rest of our lives addressing opportunities, but only a subset of them are also going to create business value. We want to align these things. We want to make sure that we're creating customer value in a way that also creates business value so that we can serve our customer over time. If we forget to create business value, our product gets shut down, our company goes out of business, and then we can't serve our customer at all. So this visual is helping us align these things. Now, in this model, outputs still matter. We do have to discover the solutions that have the potential to address these opportunities, creating customer value, in a way that drives our outcome, creating business value. So what this visual is going to give us, we're now going to look at two research activities. One that's going to help us discover opportunities, and the second is going to help us discover solutions. So if we think about our definition, we have a product trio engaging with customers on a weekly basis. Their goal is to stay focused on their outcome, so they create business value, and they're doing two small research activities week over week, one to discover opportunities and one to discover solutions. So the first thing we need to do to work in this framework is we have to define an outcome. In an ideal world, this is a two-way negotiation between your product leader and your product trio. By your product leader, this is typically an executive who can communicate how you can create value for the business. So your chief product officer, your VP of product. If you work at a really large company, it might be the general manager of a business unit. If you work at a teeny tiny startup, it might be your CEO. Once that outcome is in place, we're going to look at our first small research activity, and we're interviewing to discover opportunities. Now remember, opportunities are unmet needs, pain points, and desires. The opportunity space is always changing, so we're interviewing continuously to make sure we have a rich understanding of the opportunity space. Now the reason why most teams don't do this is it's actually pretty hard to find a customer to talk to week over week. So what I'm going to recommend is the very first thing you do as you start to adopt these habits is you automate your recruiting process. This is going to sound magical, but I want you to wake up on Monday morning, look at your calendar, and have an interview already be on the schedule without you having to do anything. And I'm going to give you the two most common strategies for how to do this. The first is to recruit people while they're using your product or service. So while you already have their attention. This works extremely well for B2C contexts and for recruiting B2B end users. Now, if you implement something like this, you're not going to just turn it on and it's going to magically work. You have to treat this like a product funnel. You got to experiment with where do you show it? How often do you show it? Who do you show it to? What specifically are you asking for? And are you offering an incentive in exchange? How far into the future are you scheduling this out? So there's a little bit to play with to get this right, but I will share the vast majority of teams that I've worked with are using this strategy to automate their recruiting process. Now, if you work on a team where you need to recruit buyers or decision makers or people who are not using your product day in and day out, I'm going to give you a second strategy. And this is where you can define triggers for your support teams. What do I mean by that? Your support teams are your customer-facing teams, the teams that are already on the phone with your customers all day, every day. Your sales teams, your account management teams, your support teams. What you can do is you can say, when you're talking to a customer who's experiencing this need or pain point, go ahead and ask them to participate in an interview. So in this first strategy, we're using our product to recruit. In this second strategy, we're using our customer-facing teams to recruit. In both instances, we can pair these paths with scheduling software so that the interview literally just shows up on our calendar. This is really critical. If you want to adopt a weekly habit of interviewing, you have to remove the burden of recruiting. So I strongly recommend you experiment with one of these two strategies. Once you have a customer in the room, we now need to look at how do you ask the right questions. And the key to interviewing well is to avoid speculation. So if I return to my Netflix example, if I work at Netflix and I'm trying to get you to watch Netflix more, maybe my outcome is to increase engagement, trying to get you to keep your subscription longer, I might want to know things like, what do you like to watch? How do you decide what to watch? Who do you watch with? What device do you watch on? But if I ask you these questions, I'm actually inviting you to speculate about your behavior. What do I mean by that? Your brain, because of the way that it's wired, is going to give you fast answers. You're going to have an answer to every single one of those questions. The problem is your answer isn't necessarily going to reflect your behavior in reality. And it's not because you're being deceptive. It's not because you're trying to lie to me or misrepresent your behavior. It's just because of a wide variety of cognitive biases of how our brains are wired. Biologically, our brains are designed to be lazy. We're going to generate a fast answer, but we're not going to take the time to think about, is that answer actually correct? Does it reflect our behavior? We don't sit around and pontificate about what do we do on Netflix. So this isn't a reliable way to understand customer behavior. Instead of asking all these who, what, why, how questions out of context, instead what we want to do is we want to focus on collecting specific stories about past behavior. So I don't want to ask you, what do you like to watch? I want to ask you, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. And then I want to listen for, who were you with? Where were you? What device did you watch on? How did you decide what to watch? What did you watch? So I can get answers to all those questions, but because I'm asking them in the context of a specific story, the reliability of your answers is going to go way up. There's another significant benefit to focusing on collecting stories. When we collect stories instead of answers to direct questions, we get context, we get nuance, and most importantly, needs, pain points, and desires start to emerge from our customer stories. So as we collect customer stories, we're going to start to hear about opportunities. That's the purpose of interviewing, is to really uncover those unmet needs, pain points, and desires. And as we interview week over week, we're going to take an inventory of all the opportunities that we're hearing. We're going to map them out using this tree structure. That's going to allow us to make a strategic decision about which opportunities are most important for our team to solve. This is missing on a lot of teams. A lot of teams talk to a customer, they hear a feature request, they go jump to build it. There's many problems with this. We're missing the strategic decision about what are the most important problems to solve, where can we have the most impact, what are the most important customer problems that create the most customer value in a way that creates the most business value. And when we jump to a fast solution, we also make a really common mistake. Even if we chose a target opportunity, even if we made that strategic decision of this is the most important problem to solve, if we jump to the first solution, all of our discovery work gets framed as, is my idea good or not? This is a really problematic framing. Decision-making researchers call this a whether or not decision. The reason why this is problematic is it exacerbates two common cognitive biases. The first is called the escalation of commitment. The more we invest in an idea, the more we identify with it, the more we fall in love with it. I'm guessing every single one of you has experienced this. It's rampant in the product world. We fixate on solutions. We fall in love with our solutions. And when we do that, it exacerbates a second bias, confirmation bias. We've probably all heard about confirmation bias. It's often misunderstood. People think it means you ignore negative feedback. That's not true. Your brain actually filters it out. It's not a conscious thing. Confirmation bias suggests that you're more likely to notice the feedback that says your idea is fantastic and completely miss the evidence that suggests it's flawed. That means you could be getting qualitative feedback about a prototype and you're going to be more likely to notice the parts of the prototype that work and not notice the parts that don't work. This is really problematic because it means you can be doing all the right discovery activities and not getting as much value out of them as you could. The way to fix this is to set up a good compare and contrast decision. For our target opportunity, we're going to work with multiple solutions where each solution has the potential to address our target opportunity. We're going to call this a compare and contrast decision. When we compare and contrast solutions against each other, we trick our brains into seeing the pros and cons of each idea. We intuitively already know this. When we're looking for a place to live, we don't look for one house or apartment. We look at multiple. When we're looking for a job, we don't just talk to one company. We talk to multiple. We forget to do this in our product work, but it's critical that we do so. This is such an important idea. I'm going to give you a visual to help you remember this. This is Usain Bolt. He's currently the world record holder in the 100-meter dash. If I asked you, is Usain Bolt fast? I want you to hear a whether or not question. This is really similar to when somebody says, is my idea good? So we're going to say, is he fast relative to what? Just like when somebody asks you, is my idea good? I want you to ask, is it good relative to what? We're training our brains to compare and contrast. Is Usain Bolt fast relative to a cheetah? Probably not. Is Usain Bolt fast relative to a Tesla? In the first 100 meters, I would pay to see that race. Is Usain Bolt fast relative to other humans? Absolutely. What we're seeing in the photo on the right is a compare and contrast decision with a clear front runner. When we're evaluating solutions, this is what we're looking for. And I also want to highlight in this photo, every runner is an elite runner, and we still have a clear front runner. So when I talk about comparing and contrasting solutions, I'm not talking about two mediocre ideas and your favorite idea, and we're looking for a front runner. I want to see teams working with 3 ideas that all have the potential to be great, and we're experimenting and evaluating until we find a clear front runner. We know from decision-making research, this dramatically improves the quality of our decision-making. Now again, the reason why most teams don't do this is we're struggling to test a single idea. We simply don't have time. We're marching against this really tough delivery schedule, and we're relying on project-based research, and as a result, we barely have time to test one idea, let alone 3. And part of this is because we're still stuck in a project world. What makes testing multiple ideas sustainable is to stop testing our ideas and instead to break them down into their underlying assumptions and to rapidly test those assumptions. This is not a new idea. Eric Ries introduced it over 10 years ago in the Lean Startup. There's 2 major reasons why we don't do this. It's really hard to see our own assumptions, so we're going to talk about how we do that. And 2, we're still stuck in a project research world. We're relying on A/B testing, where we do all the delivery work before we learn if it's the right solution, or we prototype the entire solution before we learn we're on the right track, doing all the design work before we know if it's the right thing. So I'm going to return to my Netflix example to illustrate what it looks like to work with a set of solutions, to break them down into their underlying assumptions, and then to rapidly test those assumptions in a sustainable way. So I want you to imagine that we interviewed a bunch of Netflix customers, and one of the things that we heard over and over again is, I want to watch live sports. Now, because Norway absolutely dominated the Winter Olympics, I'm going to use the Winter Olympics as my example. So I want you to imagine that we interviewed a bunch of Netflix customers, and they all said, I want to watch the Olympics live, and I only have Netflix as my streaming service. Solve this problem for me. We have 3 potential solutions. The first is we could integrate whatever TV channel in the local region shows the Olympics live. So here in the US, that's NBC. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with Norway television, but I suspect there was a television channel or 1 or more that shows the Olympics live. We could integrate that into the Netflix interface so you could watch that channel live. Second potential solution is we could partner with the Olympic Committee directly and license events. So we could show the biathlon, we could show the different Nordic ski races, etc., just like we license movies from movie studios. Third potential solution is we could say, we're Netflix, we're not going to get good at sports, let's partner with somebody who already is. Fubo TV is a service that has already partnered with a lot of TV channels and shows live feeds. We could partner with them and bundle our solutions. And our customers could watch the Olympics live. Okay, we have 3 potential solutions. They're all fairly large. They involve a lot of business development work. They involve a lot of integration work. We're not going to just A/B test them and figure out which one's going to work best. The key to making this sustainable is to break them down into their underlying assumptions and then rapidly test those assumptions. Now again, the reason why we don't do this is it's hard to see our assumptions. So first we're going to look at how do we generate assumptions. We tend to make assumptions in 5 categories. 3 of them are represented by this common Venn diagram. The first is we make desirability assumptions. Why do we think our customers want this solution? And why do we think they're willing to do what it takes to get value from it? The second is viability assumptions. Why do we think this is good for our business? If we're an outcome-driven team, why do we think this solution will address the opportunity in a way that will drive our outcome? We make feasibility assumptions. Can we build this? Is it technically possible? We also make usability assumptions. Can our customers understand it? Can they find it? Are they able to do what we need them to do? And last, this last category is often underrepresented on many teams. We make ethical assumptions. Is there any potential harm to building this solution? This is where we could look at what data we're collecting. How are we storing it? Are we using it ethically? We also can look at, are our products unintentionally replicating the inequities we see in our communities and our products? We often assume our users are like us. As knowledge workers in the tech industry, that means we assume they have a good internet connection with discretionary time and discretionary income. That means we often leave out people in rural areas on slow connections, people working multiple jobs with little discretionary income or time, and we see products replicate the inequities we see in our communities. What's good about knowing these 5 categories is they can help you generate assumptions. You can ask, what desirability assumptions are we making? What usability assumptions are we making, etc. But in my experience working with teams, this is not enough. We still have blind spots. So I'm going to give you a second strategy for generating assumptions. And that's we can use story maps to help us surface very specific assumptions. The story map on this slide are the yellow boxes. I want you to assume your solution already exists, and I want you to map out what your customer has to do to get value from it. So in this example, we're assuming we've already integrated a live feed of a local channel into the Netflix interface, and we're asking, what does our customer have to do to get value from this? So first, they have to decide they want to watch the Olympics. Then they have to choose a streaming service. They have to open that streaming service. Then they have to find that local channel, and then they have to watch the event. The value of doing this is for each step in my story map, I can ask, what needs to be true in order for my subscriber to take that action? So for example, in order for them to decide they want to watch an Olympic event, they have to be a fan of that Olympic event. They have to want to watch the Olympics. In order for them to choose Netflix, they have to know Netflix is showing the Olympics. They have to want to watch the Olympics on Netflix, meaning they don't have an alternative solution. They have to know what channel the Olympics are on. We have to be able to partner with that channel in a viable way. We have to be able to create a good viewing experience for live sports. So we're starting to surface desirability assumptions, feasibility assumptions, viability assumptions. And again, the advantage of this is that first of all, our solutions will share some assumptions. When we test those assumptions, we can build support for or refute whole sets of solutions. And some of our assumptions will differentiate our ideas. And as we test those assumptions, we start to collect compare and contrast data that allows us to quickly evaluate, do we have a clear front runner? So I'm going to give you 4 ways quickly to test your assumptions. We're going to use this assumption our subscribers want to watch sports. And I'm going to give you the first way you can rapidly test this. We can prototype to simulate a specific moment. Now I want to be clear, when I talk about prototyping, we're not prototyping the entire solution. We're prototyping just the moment in the story map where that assumption occurred. So to test this assumption, I don't actually have to do a pixel perfect production quality design at all. I could give you a list of TV shows, movies, and sporting events and ask you, what do you want to watch right now? If I have access to an unmoderated testing platform, I can design, test, and evaluate this prototype in less than a day. This is a really powerful way to collect feedback on individual assumptions. The second way I can test this assumption is with a 1-question survey. Now, just like interviewing, we want to avoid speculative questions. We want to ask about specific instances in the past. So I might ask, have you watched a sporting event in the past week? Yes or no. The power of a 1-question survey is we ask them in the context of our product or service, so we're able to collect fast responses. If your product has any amount of traffic, you typically can collect a meaningful signal in a few hours or to a day or 2. So again, a very fast way to rapidly collect feedback on an assumption. The third way we can test this assumption is to ask, are our customers already exhibiting behavior that helps us evaluate if this assumption is safe or not? So what do I mean by that? Our customers leave breadcrumbs, clues of their behavior all the time in our behavioral analytics, in their support tickets they create, in the sales conversations they have. Do we have data that either supports this assumption or perhaps suggests it's risky? In this specific example, Netflix might look at their search queries and ask, are people already searching for sports. Okay, these first three strategies, prototyping to simulate a specific moment, one-question surveys, and data mining, are going to help you evaluate a large number of assumptions that you encounter. I'm going to give you a fourth strategy that's particularly good for your feasibility assumptions. For feasibility assumptions, we often need to rely on a research spike. A research spike is a time-boxed activity where we ask our engineers to investigate something. In order for a research spike to be an assumption test, we have to start with a very specific assumption, and we're asking our engineers to simulate the experience of what it would take to build something. So I'm going to give you an example. I want you to imagine we partnered with whatever TV show shows the Olympics. Our plan is to show a live feed of that channel in the Netflix interface. And our concern is, can that channel provide an appropriate title, description, and image of what's on right now so that we can display it in our interface? So an appropriate research spike to test that assumption would be to tell our engineers, collect 24 hours of event data and evaluate what percentage of the time we can just take the data straight as is and show it in our interface, and when do we actually have to do some data manipulation. This does a few things. It gives us compare and contrast data. Is this idea easier or harder to build than some of our other ideas? And if we end up choosing this solution, our research spikes give us better data to better estimate how much time it will take to actually build the idea because our engineers have already gotten some experience with it. Okay, we just covered a lot of ground quickly, so I'm going to do a quick recap. We started at the top of this visual by defining a clear outcome. In our definition, we talked about a continuous cadence of engaging with customers. It's the trio that's engaging with them. They're doing 2 small research activities week over week to keep us focused on that outcome. The first is we're interviewing every week to discover the opportunity space. And the second is we're assumption testing to evaluate our solutions. As we find solutions that address our opportunity, we do that across the opportunity space, eventually impacting our outcome. It's how we align customer value with business value. Now, I know we covered a lot of ground. I will share with you everything I covered in this book and this talk, and much more is covered in my book, Continuous Discovery Habits. I wrote this book to be a practical hands-on guide for product teams to put these habits into practice. I definitely recommend picking up a copy. And if you want help putting these habits into practice, we have a lot of resources at producttalk.org to help you with that, including a support community and a variety of online courses. All right, I think we're ready for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Teresa. That was very interesting. This book definitely is a superb one that I've also read before. One thing that blew my mind back then was the very difference between a research question and an interview question on how it made storytelling so much more easier. We have a few questions from the community, so I guess I'll start picking up a few of them, and you answer them as we go ahead. So there's a question from Songin who says, about talking to customers weekly, we have this user group of doctors that are typically very difficult to get hold of since they are so busy. And in Norway, in the public health system, just so you know, it's very, very hard to get hold of doctors here. So do you have any advice when you can't get hold of your users? What's the best approach?
Yeah, I have worked with teams where clinicians are their customers, and they are a pretty challenging group to engage with. Here's some things that I would look for. Where are there moments in their day where they have downtime? So where they have a little bit more time to engage with you. So it's unlikely somebody who has a really busy shift schedule, who's constantly engaged in their work, they don't have a lot of downtime in their workday, it's going to be hard to get them to engage with you in their free time about something related to work, especially in a pandemic where they're probably all exhausted, right? So what you want to look for, everybody, 100% of humans, have gaps in their schedule. And what we're looking for is how do we seamlessly plug into those gaps? So what that might look like is, are there times where they're waiting for something, where they just are waiting in line? Like I worked with a company where their customers were clinicians and they had to go through a process to be able to e-prescribe medications. And as part of that, it was like a whole day event and there was a lot of waiting in line. They sent their product team to that event to interview people. That's obviously not a sustainable week over week activity, but it highlights the core principle. How do you connect with your customers at a time where they have a natural downtime, where you're almost like alleviating boredom for them? So then you got to get creative with what are those moments, and it might be specific to your product, it might be specific to your audience, but I think that's what I would push on, is how do you find those moments where they do have that downtime?
Right. One of the viewers suggested, why not just book an appointment with them as a patient? That was an interesting one. From the community, Christian has put in this question about product trios. How do you ensure the true cross-functional collaboration when you're working remotely? What are the daily habits you see that are in the most successful teams?
Yeah, this is a great question. We used to believe that teams had to be co-located and remote work wasn't possible. I think the last 2 years has killed that idea, right? I think most teams have worked remotely for the last 2 years. We did not see productivity grind to a halt. We've seen a lot of companies do great product work. I think co-location is a crutch. I think the value of co-location is that you're literally sitting next to your coworkers, and when people need help or you need to collaborate, they're right there. But I don't think it's required. I think we're living in an amazing age of collaborative tools. Our digital whiteboard tools have gotten much better. We can collaborate real time on documents together. We have really good asynchronous communication tools. We have really good live video conferencing and audio only tools. So I think this idea of being co-located is a little bit old-fashioned. I think what's critical is that we have overlap in our working hours and that we are working together real time a little bit every day. So if you work in, if your trio is spread across time zones and are split by about 8 hours and you have 1 working hour a day together, that's going to be really hard. But if you're all remote and you only have a 2-hour time zone span, that's a lot easier to do. So I would look at how do you just make sure that you have enough overlapping work hours that you're able to connect every day, that you're able to interview together, that you're able to further your discovery work together. And I think that's much more important than being co-located.
So being in the same time moment is more important than being in the same space. That's basically it. Makes sense. This is a bit of a long question, but it's very interesting. So one viewer writes, in my organization, there is an autonomous team for a product. That includes a product manager, a UX person, 2 business analysts, 2 process owners, 2 development teams, and their own product owner and tech leads. This is a trio of 9 to 10 people. Have you seen something like that work? Or does it always end up with feature teams delivering without any real and discovery work?
Yeah, I'm going to argue you're not one team. Like already in that question, it says there's 2 development teams, right? So what it sounds like is you have under-resourced teams. You have a trio, maybe a product manager, a UXer, 2 dev leads, some other roles with business analysts and whatnot. Here's what I'll say. I have never met a trio that can do discovery work well for more than 1 team. It's really time intensive. It takes a lot of time and energy to fully understand the opportunity space. It takes a lot of time and energy to understand what it's going to take to move an outcome. This is why we're moving to durable, dedicated teams on the same outcome over time. I get that most people aren't there yet, so you have to adapt these ideas based on your team configuration. So if I was the product manager in that situation, what I'm going to look for is I have 2 business analysts. How do I enable them to be little mini product managers and to support my individual dev teams and get them to be autonomous teams? And I might look more at how do I focus on getting trios for each of those teams. Maybe I'm on one of those trios and I'm supporting and coaching the other one. So I would look at how do I approximate this given that we're a little under-resourced. And if I only have 1 designer, same thing. How do I approximate this? None of us work in the ideal world. So none of us implement this model 100% perfectly all the time. What we're looking for is how do we get as close as possible and how do we iterate and improve with time?
So like a divide, coach, and conquer, perhaps. That's the mantra there. Okay. Frederick has a question here. The teams that have started to apply continuous discovery, what are the pitfalls they fall into? Which parts of the framework do you see them struggling with? And what keeps them from succeeding?
I'm seeing more and more a lot of teams trying to create an opportunity solution tree before they've talked to a customer. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Your opportunities really should emerge from interviews. And I think the reason why teams are doing this is they feel overwhelmed with requests. They feel overwhelmed with incoming data, whether it's behavioral analytics data or customer support data or sales data, and they just want to capture that on a tree and make sense of it. Here's the problem with that. Sales data, behavioral analytics data, customer success data rarely includes the context in which those needs occurred, right? We usually get a solution request, we don't even know what the need is, or we get a need request, but we don't know the context in which it occurred. It's really hard to solve needs if we don't know when, where, and how they happened. And this is the value of interviewing. Interviewing gets us the full story. So I look at all those sources as really valuable inputs that should inspire you to explore those areas in your interview. So if you see an odd behavior in your behavioral analytics, you want to ask in your next interviews about that behavior. If you see a customer in a sales conversation request a specific feature, you want to interview that customer and understand how they intend to use it. What are they doing where that solution would help them so that you get the full context. And I see a lot of teams want to skip this step, and I really don't think you're going to get the value out of opportunity mapping if you don't get the full story and understand the context.
Got it. I think we have time for another last question with Teresa. So the question we have is, Leonard asks, if a small startup team wants to get started with continuous discovery habits, what are the 3 things that they should start doing? First 3 things.
The first, on the interviewing side, I'm going to recommend you automate your recruiting process. I've met dozens of teams who think they don't need to do this. Maybe they already think it's easy to get in touch with customers. Whether it's easy or hard, I can tell you, you're always going to have weeks where it's going to fall by the wayside if you don't automate it. A release goes astray. Everybody's all hands on deck. No one's going to take the time to recruit a customer that week. And the challenge with that is when we drop to 0, going from 0 to 1 is the hardest step. So we know this from habit research, right? What makes this a sustainable habit is to do it week over week over week. And so the first thing I would recommend is take the time to automate your recruiting process, even if you think it's dead simple to find a customer to talk to. On the assumption testing side, we can rapidly accelerate our assumption tests by having access to the right tools. So having access to an unmoderated testing platform, having access to a one-question survey tool, having access to good data mining tools can really help. So if you're a brand new startup, instrument your product from the very beginning. Make sure that everybody on that development team and your designer and your product manager know how to use the tools to get access to that instrumentation data so that you can really execute on those assumption tests.
Sounds good. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Do we have one last question? Let me see. Let's take this one last question. Do you think a PM shouldn't be involved in more than one trio and focus on one outcome at a time? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the ideal world, and then I'm going to translate this to what happens in most teams. I think in the ideal world, one PM is 100% focused on one outcome with one dedicated trio. I think that's universal. I think that whether you're a product manager, a designer, or a lead engineer, you're going to do your best work if you're able to focus on one outcome with a stable team over time. Again, it's a tremendous amount of work to do to really understand the opportunity space, to really understand what's going to move that metric. And I want to see that trio not only be durable over time, I want to see them focused on the same outcome over time. I see a lot of teams, they switch outcomes every quarter, which means they went through all the learning tracks of understanding the opportunity space. And by the time they're ready to have an impact, they're moving on to the next outcome, and we make very little progress. Now, I realize most teams are split across projects. They have multiple outcomes they're trying to drive. So if that's your situation, again, I would look at how do you approximate that key idea. So if you have multiple outcomes, I don't think you can run this process well for multiple outcomes. Can you prioritize and run the process for the highest priority outcome? If you're supporting multiple teams, can you prioritize which is the team that needs the best discovery work in the short term and spend as much of your time as you can there? So don't get caught up on perfect. This process was designed for a durable trio focused on one outcome, but I've worked with teams in a wide variety of contexts, and they're just looking at how do we adapt the habits given our unique context.
All right. I think with that, we'll wrap up with Teresa's talk. Thank you so much for spending the time and sharing your insights with the community. Great to have questions from everyone here. With that, Teresa, thank you again. We'll move on to the next speaker for the evening. Susanna, now is probably the time you start setting up the screen and everything, while I do a quick round of introduction of Susanna to the community here. So for everyone who's in Product Tank listening to Susanna here, or about to listen to her, Susanna is the Chief Product Officer at Inspera, a Norwegian company, where she is focused on making assessments accessible and fair. Previously, she's worked with Telenor, and then she's moved on to the Schibsted Media Group in the B2C world, where she was first a senior product manager for Aftenposten for 3 years, and then she moved on to lead the data and the insight product as head of product there. So she's made an interesting leap from B2C in media to B2B in EdTech. So Susanna, I think you have an interesting journey to share and a very interesting case study as well around product discovery. With that, the floor is all yours. You can start sharing the screen.
All right. Thank you very much. Are you able to see my screen now? Confirmation from anyone, please. Can you see my screen? It looks like it. I'm going to go, and then someone needs to stop me if it doesn't work. So as you introduced me with, I'm going to talk about doing discovery in a high involvement B2B world, or a high pitch sales world. So as mentioned, I've been lucky enough to transition from a quite mature B2C product to a scaling B2B product, and it's definitely a different world to be in. I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to work from both angles. So to kind of describe what Inspera is and what we do, we have an end-to-end assessment platform supporting assessments really in any shape or form. So if you've taken a degree in Norway in the last, I would say 5 years, there is a very high likelihood that you have used the Inspera platform in one way or another. But our ambition is not only to support kind of the digitalization of assessments, if it's exams or other type of tests, but actually to increase the fairness and the accessibility of assessments in the first place. But what we can do really challenge kind of the industry of learning and education is that we start challenging these institutions how we measure learning, so that we can start driving user habits to improve both teaching and learning, and with a global approach as well. So this is kind of our growth journey so far. So we've gone from a very small company, only serving a couple of use cases on assessment in the early 2000s. We had a very successful spin-off with Video, which is a huge video editing platform in the US with over 40 million users today. Before kind of the platform as it is today was born in 2014, and then we have grown quite substantially since then. It's relevant when we talk about discovery who our users is. So we don't have the problem of recruiting customers, because if we ask any of our customers, they would love to sit next to us by our daily desk day to day, because they love contributing with their ideas, their challenges, and their needs. So that part is pretty easy, even though we can probably structure the process a bit further. But we have these kind of 4 segments where we have users today. It goes across what we call awarding bodies. It's very large institutions that supports typically different types of certificates. If it's language certificates, we have a helicopter pilot company that issues certificates. Then you have the governance bodies, typical and national tests in mathematics. You have the K-12, so elementary school and high schools digitalizing their assessments. And then our largest segment is the higher education with universities throughout the world. Now, our target segments sits in the awarding bodies and the higher education. And what is nice that we are able to facilitate all these needs with one SaaS platform. But that, puts a lot of pressure on how we do product management to have all these different needs in mind while, being focused in what we prioritize at the same time. I always want to bring a little bit of perspective of kind of where B2B is heading. So you've seen a lot of new companies coming in this space where you have very fully customized solutions that is, that you have end users inquiring the tools. We use a lot of these tools already. We love Retool for prototyping, use Figma every single day. So, these are very successful companies. On the other side of the spectrum is where Inspera is sitting. So we have very involved sales processes, long, lengthy tender processes, and we also need to have a very high degree of customization. And we have that in a platform, and it could, push ourselves towards the Salesforce space, but we need to surface these settings before I can, with confidence say that we do have a very customizable platform. So I was challenged to talk about case, and I chose something called rubrics. So this is functionality that enables a more efficient marketing process with less bias. So we have some of this functionality already today, and is about when you have, for instance, essay exam. So you're at the university, you're going to have an exam on a specific topic, and it's an essay question type. You might have 2,000 candidates in the class, and you're not going to be able to grade all them on your own, and you might have 10 different graders helping you out, or even more. To ensure that that process is aligned and fair to all the candidates, not being impacted by the different graders, there's different tools and mechanisms that we support to ensure that the candidate is giving a fair grade. This is one of them where you just set the different criteria. It could be vocabulary, if you answer the questions appropriately, and so on. And then you have different kind of bands to the degree of successfulness that the candidates displayed within the different criteria. Now, this has been the top priority. If we ask our revenue teams working on the higher ed segment, this is the top priority that they need to improve to unblock tender wins and new sales. Now, if we kind of turn that into product objective, which we try to do, having these very clear company objectives, we want to increase fairness and efficiency in the marketing process. And then we can, break it down into the opportunity map, and this is one of them. It's extremely easy in our business to fall into the build trap, and we have definitely done that in the past, and we'll probably do it in the future. But by doing proper discovery, we kind of get away a bit from that. So starting early enough, if we have contractual commitments or very time-specific expectations from major companies, that could be, a huge university planning to go live at scale at a certain point, needing this to do that. And it's to involve the stakeholders at an early stage and communicate along the way, including the contractual items that we may have from some legacy contracts. And then, of course, having the cross-functional teams that interact with the users and decision makers frequently, that's definitely been a key to succeed with this process. So I'm not going to go into detail how a discovery process should be, but in our world, defining the need can be quite challenging. So in this case, it was a very, very strong demand, both from internal stakeholders, but also from our users. And then, we had to dig into why that is, where does this come from? And because we already supported some of this in our existing functionality. And what we see that they want the ability to reuse these rules. So these rubrics that they have already set up on questions or tests, they want the ability to reuse this so they don't have to make it over and over again. both to save time doing it, but also to have more control in the marking process overall to ensure integrity. So that could be that you have the Faculty of Medicine. They want to standardize how the marking process is being done across the entire faculty to, increase the quality and avoid biases by the different professors or different markers. And then the final part is also to increase the transparency and learning for the candidates. If we can create a very easy to understand rubric that says why you received this particular grade, that's transparency that we can provide ahead of the test, and of course after when the feedback is provided. After we've done the research, we typically dive into ideation, ideally together with the customers. We did some of it together with the customers, but including internal stakeholders and getting up a bunch of ideas, exploring different options, but also with a constraint to keep scope down by reusing existing functionality. We could easily have opened up the scope and spent tons of time on this, but we decided early on to narrow scope down to not get into that that time need essentially. We created some user maps, and we validated it quite frequently in the process, both with our internal experts, because we're very lucky to have people that we recruited from our customers that can give us frequent feedback at all times, but also having workshops and written feedback from our customers. So we also have very formal, more formal validation sessions where we go through the solution either directly in Figma. We can also share Figma and get feedback directly from the users in there. And then we use Confluence for many reasons, but it also actually works fairly well having templates where we share the description of the functionality, the user flow, and having them provide feedback, because then we see that it goes a bit deeper into the customer's organization, not just having the users identified in the change project, but actually having it being spread a bit further, capturing more insight along the way. And then, after we've done these validations and decided on a first iteration of a solution, having a Figma prototype that we just share and see if they actually understand intuitively how it's used. Usability is a huge challenge for us because we've been in the feature kind of trap for a bit of time. So ensuring usability is key because it just makes everything so much easier after we release it as well, the less questions and less need for documentation. And then we've identified a pretty good way of kind of driving continuous dual track discovery and delivery before actually having this, big bang release. So we typically have these, say, 3 customers where we identify key users to interact with, and then we set up pretty frequent meetings so we interact ideally on a weekly basis, and then having some informal communication channels as well. I know who I can call if I have a quick question regarding this functionality because we've established those kind of informal communication channels. And then we actually have customers who have testing environments. So, and even in our stage environments, so they can test things before we even release it into production, which is great because then we don't have to do all of that quality assurance. And we even have some customers with access to our Jira, where we create Jira boards where they, create tickets and give feedback on the fly, so that information trickles through without having a lot of overhead. And everything, is released behind feature flags at first. 1, to have a configurable platform, and 2, enabling our customers to control how things are being rolled out, because they typically have to train their staff or update their internal documentation. So we have seen that this allows us to, really reduce the product's risk over time, and before releasing and scaling to, 100+ customers, meaning a lot of end users. And then, we have processes where improvements and bugs are being handled through a service desk once we kind of release something, and then that goes back into prioritization process. What are we going to work on discovery on next? So The general learnings in Aspera to create kind of the room for continuous discovery, and discovery finally became a buzzword in 2021. So I'm really excited about that. But what we see that we need to identify the right type of users, not just any user. We need to identify the people with the right mindset that do want to collaborate, but also have kind of an idea how product development should be done. And both have decision makers and the actual end users in the room, because those are typically different people in our business. And then having internal and external stakeholders play a part and communicate all the time. I always fail and underestimate how much we should communicate. So for instance, now we're launching a weekly newsletter just to keep everyone in the loop what's going on, because there's so much at stake and so much curiosity that comes with new improvements that mean something to people. But we also are in an industry where we need to avoid having these forever demands and manage customer expectations and have a clear process for actually signing off. If it has appeared in a contract, we need to actually sign off on the needs that we are going to be supporting on those contractual terms. It doesn't mean that we're going to continue improving it, but we need to sign off the actual formal process at some point, so that we can move on to continuous discovery afterwards. So that's also been a change, starting to focusing on signing off needs and not just signing off features or functionality that typically is what is listed in tenders and these type of contractual processes. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Susanna. That was very insightful. I think looking at the slide on the dual track of discovery and delivery, it's very clear that you're not building and flying the plane at the same time. So that's quite good to know. We have a couple of questions in the audience. One is, how do you know, or I would actually say both the questions more or less are on the same lines. How do you know when you have done enough discovery or research on a certain feature?
Good question. I think since we're still a scale up, we don't have a mature product market fit. So we are often quite time bound in what we need to improve to get further ahead. I have kind of the rule of thumb that we need to talk to customers in our main hubs and our main segments. So we need to have at least one customer from kind of awarding body segments, because those are quite similar in their needs. And then having one from our different hubs. So one from the Nordics, one from Australia and New Zealand, and one from the UK, that we typically have covered kind of the variances that we see between the different type of customers that we do have. So having kind of validation sessions with those four, and ideally having all four represented in the early research and ideation phase as well. That's kind of how we try to scope the research phase.
Got it. So Ingrid also has a question which says, we have an ongoing discussion at work about how much discovery one should do before starting prototyping, typically at the very start of every new product development. What's your take on this?
Well, it depends a bit on how you define prototyping. So we had this discussion a bit recently, because like what do we want to accomplish? So we have some of our very data-driven teams that the entire functionality is based on data. We for instance use Retool, and we're testing both kind of the feasibility risks and the value risks at the same time through the prototype. Whereas you might have prototypes purely for checking off usability risks. So it depends a bit on how you want to use it, and yeah. That's how we use it for the most part. I don't always see the need to develop a full functioning prototype before starting development. If we're pretty confident in what we're building, But then having, the usability checkup with a functioning prototype going through the flows is something we always try to do, because that's usually where the biggest risk is sitting.
Got it. We have time for two more questions here. The one we have is, in your view, what are some of the alerting signs that you are in a feature trap? You talked about that a bit. So how did you get out of it?
Well, I can tell what we've tried to do. So we actually went from kind of a DevOps organization where you have team leads that function both as kind of product owners and engineering managers at the same time. So we stopped doing that and actually established cross-functional teams with a dedicated product trio and having, getting that out of the way. That's kind of the first step, first part. I think what was very easy to see for me coming in from the outside was that we went to our customers and asked for requirements, and then that was it. Then we took the requirements, took it back into the organization, wrote some specifications, sent it back to the customer to sign it off, and then we went into delivery, and then we have release management, and then having a use acceptance testing by the customer, and then done next requirement. And I think, getting out of that and actually not start to discuss requirements, but starting to discuss needs, then you need to start doing, user flow diagrams. Where are the pain points today? Why are you doing this today? And what is actually the objective of improving this area for the customer? Like, what are they trying to accomplish? So we can have kind of a shared goal of what we're doing. Those type of discussions have definitely helped starting to get out of that kind of feature team way of work and progressing into proper product team and product-led growth instead of sales and tech-led growth.
Got it. And the last one here is, how does the team balance between the forever demands in tenders versus the identified opportunities within your users?
Very much a real life challenge. So we try to control that by having cross-functional go, no-go meetings on new opportunities. So when tenders are being published, we have a bid team that does the initial assessment of how well fitted is it to our existing products? Does it align with our product strategy? Does it match kind of the general needs of the market? And then we get into the details. We dig through it and analyzing and see if this is a good tender for us. Does it align with our long-term product strategy? Is it a user that we want to collaborate with? And for instance, a big win for me is that we see tenders having more user scenarios and user needs rather than, we need this and this and this feature. And that's also part of the assessment. Do we think this is a customer that we can collaborate with? If that's something you want to do to kind of close a market fit gap, if that's the case, because that definitely do happen.
Fantastic. That's all the questions for today. That's all the time we have for the Q&A with Susanna. Susanna, thank you so much for taking the time. I know it was very, very hectic for you in the last few days, and you've taken the time and the effort to create the presentation, practice, and present it here today. Thank you so much. With that, we'll move on to the next set of speakers. So the next set of speakers is from Favorit. We were supposed to have 3 speakers, Tia, Ingrid, and Dylan. But because Dylan is not joining us, it so happens that in the month of March, we have an all-women's panelist today. So welcome to Tia and Ingrid. So you can start setting up your screens while I quickly introduce both of you to the audience of Product Tank. So Tia is a senior product leader at Favorit, and she's also acting as the interim chief product officer there. She's accompanied by Ingrid, who is a UX designer there, and combined amongst them, they have a lot of experience amongst some leading organizations in Norway, that being NAV, Finn, Sopra Steria, and the others. So I think it's up to you. The two of you are going to present an interesting case study with Favorit and your journey with product discovery. Looking forward to this. Stage is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Shubham. Ingrid and I will take you through how we went from failing to nailing through product discovery. First, I'll kick it off by telling you what Favorit is and what we do. Let me take you back 4 years from now, to the days prior to COVID, all the restrictions and table service only. Imagine that you are traveling 300 days a year, eating lunch and dinner 500 times a year at different restaurants across the world. You observe and feel first-handedly how the guest journey is centered around the staff and their needs, not the guests. As a guest, you end up spending a lot of time waiting to order more, or to pay. You see just how the industry needs a transformation, and you envision a future where the experience is all about the guests and their needs and preferences. This was the birth of Favorit. Today, over 1.3 million guests and staff at over 950 different restaurants can order and handle payment using our products in Norway, Sweden, and UK. We create an ecosystem that will make your time out as a guest. I'm sorry. We create an ecosystem that will make your time out with friends as great and friction-free as possible. What makes us different is how we work, which is closely with our customers and always putting the guests first. Moving forward, our biggest challenge is proving our value in a world without COVID restrictions, and Ingrid will tell you how we are working with our customers, always putting the guests first and entering the global market, but still keeping focus. Take it away, Ingrid.
Thank you. So I'm going to tell you why you should stop caring about what the users say. And you might wonder how we can put the guest first and have close collaboration with our customers, and at the same time, not caring about what our users say. Well, with focus, you can actually do that. So, because how often haven't you talked to your users and gotten input for improvements that you did nothing about? I've at least experienced this a lot when I have talked to users. And my goal for this presentation is for you to not feel bad about this, because this will actually help you succeed. Here is an example of feedback that we have gotten in Favorites. I'm going to read this out loud for you. It is very annoying that I have to scroll to the top of the menu again to see the categories. Taking orders at the bar with Favorites takes way too long. Which of these two do you think gives most value? Well, I would say that they're both valuable. It just depends on what you are trying to achieve. So I'm going to give you an example of how this looked like for us last year. So we are trying to achieve success in the United Kingdom. This is because we think that this is a good place to test if we have value outside of all the COVID restrictions and outside of the Nordics. And this was actually a goal set last summer. So this was even before both me and Thea started here. But in reality, this actually looked a bit more like this. So we did not have to have any UK focus. We didn't have any focus at all. We just jumped on whatever feature requests the Norwegian customers gave us, or even some of us had some cool ideas that they wanted to try out in the product. And this is not the way that we want to work, and we all know this. But then there was something that happened that changed how we worked. the reopening of Norway, 25th of September. And don't get me wrong, this was a great day for almost everyone except favorites. So, and by the way, this is not a super accurate graph because I don't think I'm allowed to show you the real numbers, but this is approximately how it went down. We lost a lot of customers. And what happened that day was that the bars opened again and people didn't have to sit by the table to do orders. So they could go over to the bar and order drinks. And in the restaurant, they could go back to the more traditional way of doing table service. So a lot of our customers, they used our QR code solution where the guest orders by scanning a QR code by the table. And a lot of customers, they decided to turn that solution off. And you're probably thinking now, shouldn't we have foreseen this? And yeah, we totally should have foreseen this. But this is what happens when you just act on input from all over the place, instead of focusing on what you're actually trying to achieve. But at this point, our focus became really clear. We had to win those customers back. Because if we're losing customers here in Norway, how would we ever succeed in the UK market? So we started to do some research to learn more about why they stopped using us. And we have a department in Favorit that's called Customer Success, which have close contact with our customers. And their role is to kind of make sure we don't lose them and do upsell. So they talk to our users every day. And we have this thing that we call extended teams in Favorit, where we had one person in customer success as a part of our extended team. So this way, we got very much feedback from her that she had heard from her customers. And also the other way around, she could be very informed of what our team was working on. And also after this reopening, we added a health metric that was about weekly meetings with our customers, just to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. So with this customer success person in our team, we very easily could find the right customers to talk to. So we did that, and our entire team joined a lot of these meetings. So both me from design, Thea from product, and also our developers were present in those meetings. So we asked them what happened on Saturday. So, because we had actually assumed that our customers would, or the guests of the customers, would still use our QR codes at the bar. So some bars actually, they didn't remove the QR codes right away, but they kept them there. But what happened was that instead of the guest actually scanning the QR codes and orders, because that's super chill, right? Scanning the QR codes instead of going to the bar. But we saw the opposite. People went over to the bar to order drinks. And this became kind of a chaos for our customers, and it resulted in them turning us off. I'll go a bit more into the reasons after. But when we talked to these customers, we also got a lot of feedback about everything else, like things that didn't work that well in the back office, or how we can improve the guest solution. But since we had lost so many customers, we just need to focus on our goal, which was to figure out why they didn't want to use us anymore. So a lot of this had been problems a long time. And those kind of feedback, we kind of just had to ignore and focus on the real problem here. And our biggest pain point was that our solution for waiters was not suitable for taking orders at the bar or by the table. So yeah, a lot of our customers use QR codes, but we also had this solution, like you can see to the right here, from last summer. And this was made kind of as a copy of our guest solution. And our assumption at the time was that you would only use this for doing table service, so going over to the table and taking orders in the restaurant. But what it showed us at the reopening was that we didn't have a solution that worked great for taking orders by the bar. And we also found out that this didn't work great for taking orders by the table either. So because the main problem with this was that it took too long to actually do an order, because you had to scroll a lot, and it was basically very difficult to use. And it didn't give a very good overview either, especially for tables. If you have a table of 7 people, it wasn't really working that well. So at this point, we knew the problem and we knew what to build. So the next step was to figure out how to build it right. So we started to make prototypes, and we brought the team to our customers. So here you can see many people from our team, both developers and myself and the customer success manager, and also Thea, who is taking the picture. So we did several iterations with customers where we tested our new product. And when we, in the previous round where we talked to our users about why they turned us off, we also got to see the solutions that they had for taking orders over the counter. So that was solutions that they had used before COVID, and they had now started to use again. So we took a lot of inspiration from those solutions to make our prototype. And after prototyping and user testing, we also had pilot customers. So we got to try out this solution on live customers, so they could take real orders from users, just to see if there was anything else that came up that did not come up when we did user tests, or any technical stuff that we needed to fix before we scaled up to several customers. So this was our new solution, and our customers are very happy with this. Like this waiter from Grådi, I'm going to read this quote as well. "It is so fast, super smooth and easy to find items. Much more user-friendly than the previous one." And it was also a bit funny because we had showed him this prototype and user tested it with him like a week before they were supposed to go live. And then we had set up a meeting with them, like a Tuesday, 4 o'clock or something, where they could go live, and we would onboard the rest of the waiters to show them how it worked, etc. But when we came in there, this waiter, he met our team with high fives, and he said, "You are my heroes." Because they had actually started to use this product earlier that day, so they didn't really need any onboarding. So I guess that is a good sign. And this is the result of us having a very clear goal and just focusing on the feedback that took us closer to our goal. So now we have the solution that works for taking orders for the bar and the tables, but we still get a lot of feedback about how we can improve our product. But then we need to remember what we are trying to achieve, because we're trying to achieve success in the UK. So all the input we get, we need to think about what will take us closer to this goal. And you're probably also thinking like, but what about the other feedback? Should we just ignore that? Well, if you have good processes in place for storing that information and can use it later, then that's great. My point is, if you want to succeed, you need to focus on the input that takes you closer to your goal and stop caring about everything that the users say. So to round this up, what are you trying to achieve? And think about that the next time you get input to how you can improve your product. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ingrid and Thea, both of you, for the presentation. We have a couple of questions, or 3 questions here. First one is from Leonard saying, Ingrid, what's the number one difference in feature requests you see from users in the Nordics and the UK?
Maybe cache, because we don't have a good solution to handle cache today. And Norway is very digital, so we don't have much cache here. But in UK, that is still a thing. So they really need like a way to get a cache, for example.
Got
A
it.
lot of
So it's
specific,
it's the mode of payment that you've seen primarily being the difference in the two.
yeah, well, that's one of them. One of the things that's different.
Okay. Fred has a question for both of you. You deal with, yeah, this is an interesting one. You deal with both your customers and their guests, so the diners and your customers. How do you then prioritize and balance your work to make a service that brings value to both these groups?
Should I
Okay.
answer it, or do you want to answer it, Thea?
Yeah, I can give it a go. Yeah. So we are always putting our guests first and making sure that they will get the best guest experience that they can have. Moving into this world without the COVID restrictions, and we see that people are doing their orders by walking up to bars. We need to move into how we can make that part of the service better for the guests to be provided with what they want as efficiently as possible. So by that we need to enable the customer staff, the restaurant staff, to provide best possible service for the guests.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Was it something you want to add, Ingrid?
No, that was basically it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We have time for one more question, and Marius has a question for you. Do any customers want to pay for developing something that you want to develop at a later stage yourself? If that's the case, then what do you do about it?
Yeah, good question. I haven't received any requests as of such. So yeah. So I guess the answer is no, not yet. Yeah.
Not yet. You haven't fallen into that trap yet.
Luckily.
We're yet to cross the chasm then.
Yeah.
So Leonard has a question in the meanwhile. So since you said no, then we'll shoot one more question at you.
Yeah.
How did Favrit end up with UK as the next market to enter? How do you balance growth in a market versus entering a new market?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess kind of the thing is what we wanted to expand outside of the Nordics, and we think that UK is a good place to start because it's kind of different from the Nordics. By what Ingrid pointed out, as it's not as digital as the Nordics. They don't have anything like Vipps, for instance. So by making it there, we would make it in a very big market as well. So the size of the market is also one of the reasons why we want to enter it. So being able to make it in a market that has that size of addressable market, and also being that different from the Nordics, is what made it attractive to enter into. And as of to balance of growth in that market versus entering a new growth in our market that we are presently in, and then entering the new one, that's a very good question. And what we do is that we see the needs that we have in the UK, and then the ones that we have in the Nordic countries, and we look at the prospects, how big is the addressable market for all these needs, and that's kind of the basis for our prioritization. And we do, of course, have the key results objectives and key results, addressing these the objectives and results that we want to achieve. So that's very helpful in this the prioritization process.
So you're also guided by OKRs to kind of
Yeah.
go ahead in this journey.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's all the time we have for Q&A today. Tia, Ingrid, thank you so much for the time and effort that you've taken to create the presentation. Also to Dylan, who couldn't join, but I know he's also putting the effort behind all of this. Thank you to all of you for having created the presentation and spend the time doing this here. Look forward to seeing you guys again. For the rest of the audience, like I promised you at the beginning, there's one small announcement yet to come. So many of you have asked us, where is this YouTube link going to be available? Is the recording going to be available or not? This same link you're using today is available and I will be shared on multiple channels. So feel free to go back and watch this at your own leisure. Now to the next announcement. We are excited to announce our next event, which is supposed to happen just before the Easter week. Who's coming? Marty Cagan. Marty Cagan will be in town on April 12th, and we'll announce our venue soon. We'd like to thank our sponsors, NetLife and Iterate. So he's going to be speaking on common transformation pitfalls on when you're building empowered teams. So April 12th in the evening, the intention is to make this a hybrid event. The meetup description is going to be, the meetup is going to be live. Once we finish this, I'm going to go set it live. You can sign up right away. Because this is going to be hybrid, we would like to understand whether you would want to join in person or online. Now note that the online event will only have his talk, but the in-person event will also have the Q&A and will give you the chance to ask the questions as well. So remember to sign up once the email comes out or once the links is shared. Please make sure you mention whether you're joining online or on site. And we look forward to this brilliant event that NetLife and Iterate will help us bring to life in April. With that, we hope you had great insights for the whole evening. Thanks again to all the speakers, Teresa, Susanna, Ingrid, and to Tia for taking the time and speaking and presenting all their insights. With this, we close for the evening. You all stay safe. Have a good night. Take care. Bye.